in our course, fruit production, 35 and it's going to be about the cultural practices for or orchard management, the management that we use. And so the topics covered in this class include the irrigation, as well as the method of irrigation, how much water you need to apply, and what's the quality of the water and why that is very important. So this is all about irrigation. And then we'll talk about fertilizers as well. And next will be about mulching and how that is different from cover crops. You will understand these two terms, mulching and cover crops. Then we'll also talk a little bit about crop protection, including weed control as well as pest and disease management. So let's start off with irrigation of fruit crops. Irrigation of fruit crops, when we talk about irrigation of any plant, any crop, we are talking about two things: the quantity of water and also how much, here is how much you apply, and how long duration. So here you're talking about how much, and in the second part is duration. Duration means how long, which is a time, how long you are going to run the irrigation system. So these two things are affected by different factors, and we'll discuss these one by one. We'll start with the first factor, which is called plant species. So different crops will always have different requirements. So water you apply to date palm will be different from water you apply to mango tree, to banana tree. Why that is? Because as you know already, these are different plants, so they have different root system. Some are fibrous, some are very deep tap roots. So the system itself is different. The root distribution is different. Some roots are very wide, others are very narrow. Also, plant canopy, not only the root, but also the vegetative part above the ground. And we're talking about this is the canopy. And so that is also a factor in how much water, because the plant canopy means how much leaves are in the tree. And so how many leaves will depend on how much transpiration happens. That's why canopy is very important. As well as ground cover. What covers the ground here is also very important. Sometimes you have plants, sometimes you have mulch, and so this will reduce water evaporation. So this particular part will talk about evaporation from the soil. So this is evaporation. And the plant canopy itself will talk about basically transpiration. So we have transpiration and we have evaporation from the soil. That's why when we talk about irrigation, we always talk about ET, evapotranspiration. Okay, in addition to these factors, there are also other things like growth stage of the plant. How old is the plant? So young plants will have less water. Ripening plants or mature plants will need more water. And also if the plant is flowering and fruiting, it will be different than if there are no flowers or fruits. If they are dormant or they are not dormant. So the growth stage of the plant is also very important. Other things that affect irrigation, and irrigation is very important in terms of plant species, is the flowering. You understand some of the plants require no water for flowering. For example, if you talk about citrus, we stop irrigating citrus around November or October, so they will have flowers, because irrigation really affects flowering. Also affect the drop of the flower. If you don't irrigate when the plants have already flowers, then you may lose the flowers. So the flowers shedding means the flowers will drop. During fruiting time, this is very important. During fruiting time, you really need a lot of water. And so that's the maximum water, the peak, how much water you need. You really have to apply irrigation during the time when the fruits are already during the fruit development especially, and also seed formation, because that's when the fruit develop. Because without irrigation, the fruits will not as you know, like I already told you before, that these cells here in the fruit are the same number since fruit set. So now what makes this fruit bigger is the cell enlargement. And a major player in the transfer from cell division, here is cell division, and here is cell enlargement. It's called enlargement because they increase in size, and water is very important for the fruit to increase in size. Okay, so here is the field where we have the trees, and the irrigation system here is popular irrigation system that is installed during the time of the orchard establishment, and this is spacing between the trees. So this area is where evaporation happens. So this is where water loss from the soil happens, and these are the canopies where transpiration happens. So this is transpiration. So the total water needed by these trees will be the total of evapotranspiration. Usually, when we count evaporation, we really consider this area, which is under the tree. But because the root systems are scattered all of these places here and there, then we are really talking about evaporation in this whole area. So when we calculate evapotranspiration, we have to consider two factors: the evaporation from the soil, that's one. Second thing is the transpiration from these canopies, from these trees. And the maximum you need, and it's very important and very critical, as already mentioned before, during the flowering time and also during fruit development. That's why plant species is very critical. Other factors that determine irrigation requirements of trees include climate, because different climates means you have different temperature, rain, humidity, wind, and all of that. All these factors are very important in calculating evapotranspiration. Here, evapotranspiration gives you the amount of water you need. So ET means evaporation, زائد transpiration. So evaporation from the soil and transpiration from the plant. And these two factors, or these two things to pass evapotranspiration or ET, are affected by all these climatic factors, by temperature. Of course, higher temperature means higher evaporation. Higher humidity means less evaporation. Here, irrigation frequency, which means how often you are applying, which is depending on how much rainfall there is. So that's why climate is very important. The rain is very critical for this factor. As well as there are seasonal changes, as you might know. The summer is very different than the winter. Hot summer means more water. Cold weather or winter means less water you need to apply. So if you are irrigating once a week during the summer time or during the winter time, you will need probably 7 times per week or every day. So once a week here, once a day irrigation, because of the increase in temperature during the summer. Other factors include soil types. Heavy soils mean soils with high clay, high percentage of clay. As you know, the soils are made of clay, silt, and sand. So if the heavier the soil is, the more clay there is in that soil, and the lighter soils will have more sand. If you have clay soils, that means you need to apply more water, but less frequently. That means more water, one time irrigation, but every 2 times a week. But if you have light soils, means you have more sand, then you need less water, but more frequently. So you apply, for example, every day. So in the case of sand, you apply a little bit every day. In the case of clay, you apply more, but maybe 3 times a week instead of every day. Other factor that is very important in the Irrigation is quality of water. That is a very important factor, especially in Oman and Batna and other areas. Saline water is not very good for irrigation, and therefore it will lead to salt accumulation in the root zone. Sometimes you have to clean the soil, or we call it soil leaching. So leaching means you are basically removing the salts from the soils. So if you are irrigating with saline water, sometimes you have to because you have no other water, then you have to do also leaching. That means you have to, once in a while, you go and irrigate with normal water, clean water, to clean the soils. You flood the whole field with water, and then that will leach the salts below the root zone. There are different methods for irrigation, and these are the common ones. We have the flood irrigation, the one that we normally do in the traditional irrigation systems. This is not a good irrigation system in terms of low efficiency. It's very low in terms of efficiency because we are wasting too much water. That wasted water will go via runoff, means you are trying to only cover the root zone here, but of course the water will not only stay in the root zone, it will also go outside of the root zone, as well as deep percolation. Deep percolation means deep in the soil below the root zone. So this is lateral movement of water. This is deep deep movement of water, as well as even if you have no runoff and you have no percolation, you also have high rate of evaporation. So in this case, you are wasting too much water in the evaporation. So you have three ways of wasted water. One is runoff. This is a tree, for example. You have, this is called runoff. This is the root zone. So if it goes below the root zone, that's called deep percolation. This is the deep percolation here. And of course, some of that water will be evaporated. So that's also wasted. This is why this is not efficient irrigation system. It's low efficiency. But it is good because it is low cost. It doesn't require much. You only have to install this kind of tunnels here, and that's all you need. These are the tunnels here, and you just have to open it. There's no pipes, no pumps, nothing. So it's very low cost, very nice. But also a problem with land topography. The land has to be flat, like you see here, because if the land is not flat with a slope, then all the water will accumulate here. So not good for slopes, this kind of irrigation system, but it is good for flat lands, for flat farms. The modern irrigation system is different from the traditional irrigation system. This is more efficient, of course, less water is wasted. Almost all the water is delivered to the plant. However, it has high capital. Remember, that one is low cost. This one is high capital, means high investment, requires a lot of money. But this is good because it can be used on a wide range of topography, means whether the land is slope or flat, the irrigation system will always be working because these pipes will work everywhere, and you just have to do your basin and then you irrigate. So regardless of the topography of the land. Of course, there are different irrigation systems, including sprinklers, drip, poplars, and so many others. So these are the two main irrigation systems that we use for fruit trees. Now, how much water is needed? That depends on the crop. And we'll talk about some of these crops like date, mango, and banana, and we will discuss that part, inshallah. Now, the second part of this lecture is fertilizer requirements and nutrition requirements of the plants, including manure. So fertilizers are usually two types. One is called chemical fertilizer and one is organic. So we have chemical and we have organic fertilizer. Chemical means synthetic, it's man-made. And organic, as you know, it's mostly manure. There's all kinds of manures. There's green manure from the plants, there's cow manure, animal manure. So there are a variety of manures there. All are organic. The chemical ones is like urea, for example, or NPK. These are the types of fertilizers that we are talking about here. And these are very important for plant nutrition. Why you need fertilizers? Because the plant to grow will take all the nutrients from the soil. So this is the soil and this is the plant. So for the plant to grow, you need nutrients. You need like nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, and so on. Once they set fruit, so these plants will set fruits. In nature, these fruits will go back to the soil. But because these are fruit trees, we harvest the fruit. So this is the fruit is harvested. And so the nutrients here will be taken away from the soil. So that's why we have to put back the nutrients back to the soil. And so that will not cause any deficiency on the tree part. Now, most of the nutrients in the plant are actually provided in nature. For example, the most important elements are water, carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen, and this is provided from the air. The plant can take it from the air or from the soil without any help from humans. So we only have to be concerned about 1%, only 1%. So this is very, very important that we only require 1%, which is not much. That you need to use or to apply in just 1%. So you can see here 90% water, 9%. So what is that 1% that is needed? These are the 1%. They are divided into different types of nutrients or elements. When are the 16 of them are called essential nutrients, and these are the 3 that are taken up from the air or from the water, and 13 others are actually in the soil in large amount and very rare that we need to actually apply these nutrients, but they are available. And if you take them in large quantities, the plant may show deficiency symptoms, so you have to apply fertilizer. These types are macronutrients and micronutrients. The macronutrients come into 2, primary and secondary. These are the NPK, and this usually sold as NPK fertilizers, is one type of fertilizers. Sometimes it's supplemented by these 3 other macronutrients needed by the plant in large quantity. So if it is macronutrients, that means required in large quantities by the plant. That include calcium, magnesium, and sulfur. Micronutrients, on the other hand, are required in small quantities. And these are usually called trace elements also. This is another term for the micronutrients called trace elements. You find these fertilizers also available in the market, include iron, boron, manganese, zinc, copper, molybdenum, chloride. Also some others, aluminum, silica. Not all soils will require them all the time, but usually like zinc, magnesium, boron, in acidic soil or alkaline soils, you may need some of these micronutrients. In most fruit trees, you don't really need them much, except in very poor soils, or the soil pH is not good, or the soil is saline. That's when you need these nutrients. But these ones here, the macronutrients, you almost always need them. You almost always require these larger like NPK, calcium, magnesium, almost all the time. So this is the 13 micronutrients you need to apply as a fertilizers. Fertilizer itself, when you try to apply fertilizers, based on what? There are also different factors, just like irrigation system or amount of irrigation you need to apply. Here also fertilizer is the same story. How much water, fertilizer. Then we have to talk about 2 things here. The quantity, how much water, how much fertilizer. How much means the quantity, this one. And how often. Again, the time, the same story like irrigation. This is the frequency. So we have frequency and we have the quantity, how much. There are so many factors that also affect, just like in irrigation, also fertilization have many factors, including soil and plant factors. So, for example, in the soil, you have to know how much the soil has of these, whatever you want to apply. For example, how much nitrogen, how much potassium, how much phosphorus in the soil. And so therefore we call this soil fertility. So soil fertility means how much of these nutrients are already available in the soil. Also the same thing, there are also plant factors like the same like the irrigation. The age of the plant, the species, the season, and so many other things. That's how what determines how much quantity. And so in the case of fertilizers, it's very always recommended to do soil and plant analysis. Okay. In terms of frequency, which means how much you apply, how often, what time you apply it, how often. Then also it is the same story. It's related to the growth of the plant, because sometimes if you fertilize in the wrong time, you will lose the flowers, or you will lose the fruits, or you will discourage, for example, vegetative growth. And therefore, it is very important to understand when to apply fertilizer, what time. And this will truly depend on the plant species. Application of fertilizer to mango is very different from irrigation of fertilizers to citrus, for example. Here, nitrogen as an example, you apply 2 doses usually after harvest, okay, because you are harvesting the fruit, so you want to put back some of that nitrogen in the soil. And then usually after fruit set or during fruit development. You don't do nitrogen during flower initiation or flower development. These are the two times that are very good for nitrogen application. So as it says here, you avoid this. You avoid fertilizing during flowering or prior to flowering, because if you fertilize urea before flowering, you are going to get vegetative growth. You are not going to get flowers. So here, vegetative growth is promoted. That means flowering is not promoted. And if the plant is flowering, you may lose the flowers. So you have to be very careful when to fertilizer. Now the question is where to and how to apply. There are different ways of applying fertilizers. You know, some of it by spraying the fertilizers as a liquid. Some of it you place it under the tree, around the tree. Sometimes you put it with the irrigation system. If you are going to apply fertilizer in the irrigation system, there's a name for that. It's called fertigation. Fertigation means fertilizer in the irrigation water. So this is the irrigation water, and you apply fertilizer in it, and therefore it's called fertigation. So this is some of the pictures that show deficiencies of different types. For example, here you lose the flowers, you lose the fruits if you don't fertilize properly. Here you have nutrient deficiency of the fruit, and here you have yellowing of the leaf. So all these are symptoms of nutrient deficiency. It's called nutrient deficiency. That means the plant wanted some nutrients. For example, here you have nitrogen deficiency. That means your plant will require some nitrogen in this case. Now we will cover another topic in orchard management. It's called mulching. Mulching is basically applying certain substance or insulating material on top of the soil surface. That way you reduce the weeds, you reduce water loss. It's very good for the plant. This mulching can be two types. One is called organic. You can see here organic mulch. It's made of straw, fiber, plant residue, wood chip. Here is plant residue. Here you have like the leaves, here the wood chip. Also here another type called inorganic mulch. You can see it here as plastic. So that is inorganic. So this is organic because it's made of organic material. This is inorganic mulch. It is made of plastics or rocks, polymers, and so on. What's the advantage of mulching? Why do you need mulching like that? That mulching is very important in a few things. It will help you in the orchard, especially in larger trees, because it regulates temperature of the soil, and therefore that even though it is very hot in the atmosphere or the heat is high, but this will keep the roots very cold, and so they are more active during the temperature that is a bit cooler than outside, especially here in Oman. Also, it increases water and nutrient availability. It doesn't lose water as much. The nutrient also is not lost, so they stay there. And of course, because of the good temperature, good water, and nutrients, then the root growth will be promoted. Second reason is to conserve soil moisture. So you save the water by reduced temperature and evaporation. As you know, ET is related to soil temperature, right? I told you already that before. And so when you have mulch, you actually conserve soil moisture. Another reason is reduce soil erosion. As you know, if there's a rain or there's large flood irrigation, you may lose the soil surface. And so to reduce soil erosion, you can also apply mulch. When you have mulch, you also actually, in a way, you control the weeds, unwanted plants, because they don't get light and so they cannot grow as well, unlike the larger tree with the roots are very deep. The organic mulch can also in itself, if you are using wood chip or you're using leaf, then this organic matter and nutrients can be added from the organic mulch. So this is only true for organic mulch, but it can also be true for inorganic. All these factors are applied to both organic and organic. But if you have organic, like wood chip or leaves, then it is better because you have organic matter and nutrients added to the soil. What are the problems of or disadvantages of mulching? They can have insects inside, like scorpions or pathogens, rodents, other harmful insects in that mulch, in the mulch. So you can see there could be scorpions or snake or something else in the soil. Roots may grow in the mulch if it is too much, and then later on will be damaged by the chemical when you spray. So you don't want to have a thick mulch. You have a very little mulch, good enough to conserve the root temperature and the water, but not too much. Otherwise, the roots will grow there. Another kind of mulch is called cover crops. This is actually a type of mulch in many cases. This is kind of mulch also, the cover crop, but it's different because this is growing plant. So here it's different because this is growing herbaceous plants, for example, legumes or grass. Okay, and that's the same thing. It covers the area between trees. Okay, either part or throughout the year. In our case, for example, for Oman, we have these grasses or date or alfalfa that grows between date plants. This is called cover crop. It covers the area between different trees. It also can be intercrop. Sometimes they call it filler crop. It is large or undercrop. It's the same thing. These are all the same definition as cover crop. Okay, so this is a very good example. When you grow grass or alfalfa in date palm orchards in Oman, this is a form of cover crop. There are many advantages for that, similar to the mulch. They add organic matter to the soil, especially if you use legumes. They reduce erosion by water and by wind and water. They reduce temperature, just like mulch. They prevent nutrient leaching, like nitrogen. They increase soil nitrogen, of course, if they are leguminous crops. They provide income. You know, this alfalfa or grass can be harvested any time of the year and then sold or given to the animals as animal feed. So this is additional income from the date palm farm or from any fruit farm. It also reduces the weed because the weed cannot compete with the crop. The problem with or disadvantages of cover crops include they compete with trees for water and nutrients. So you have to calculate how much these plants, how much the grass, how much all these plants require for irrigation and fertilization, and then you add that also because you're not only fertilizing or irrigating fruit trees, but you also do that for the cover crop. Problem two is they can have a home for insects and diseases. And you can see here in this picture, you can see that alfalfa has the which is wrong, obvious here. You can see it. So this is a problem. You can also see here another. This can be transferred from the alfalfa to the lime tree. This which is brown. And so some of these cover crops, they can themselves harbor insects and diseases that later on develop and infect the crop that you are trying to conserve. Other management practices include weed control. Weeds are also like cover crops, but they are unwanted. They are not like grass or alfalfa where we grow it. These plants we don't grow it. They grow on their own. So they compete also for water and nutrients with the trees. They also can harbor pests and diseases, and they make it difficult for the machines to go if they are larger shrubs, for example, bigger weeds. So you have to do weeding and remove these um, or control the weeds. We do two things to control the weeds. One is called physical. It's either by cultivation, using cultivators, or where you remove the weeds by machines or manually. The problem with cultivation is they can destroy the roots of the crop. Okay, so that's a problem, and so we have to be conscious about how deep the cultivation is going to be. You can also use chemicals that is called herbicides. These are different kinds of chemicals, but you have to also be careful because there are two types of herbicides. Some are selective, that means they will target only one kind of plant, for example, dicots or monocots. Some are non-selective, they can kill anything, including your crop. So you have to be very careful, especially if your fruit crop is very young, you may spray it and kill it instead of killing the weeds. There are also different kinds of mode of action of herbicides, include contact and systemic. So here in contact, you have to really touch all the weeds, otherwise you didn't do anything. Systematic, the herbicides will go through the plant itself, translocated. So you just apply it with the water, for example, or you apply it in certain part of the crop or the orchard, and then it will kill all the weeds. When do you apply chemicals? You can do that before you start anything, called pre-planting, or after you planted your plant, but it's not yet out, like pre-emergence. Okay. So the weeds can be killed before the crop is grown, or after you have the crop, then you kill the weed. Another method of controlling weeds called biological control. As you know, there are biocontrol methods for controlling weeds and pests and diseases. For weeds, there are two types. There's the predators and there's the parasites. So in this case, we usually get insects that will actually eat the grass, but they will not eat the crop. And this is very tricky because you don't know if the new insect will develop to become a pest on its own. And then we have a problem on the crop. And that happens many times where you bring a new insect to eat the weed, and then later on they develop and they eat the crop itself. So you have to be careful there. For pests and diseases, there are so many different kinds of pests and diseases infecting different kinds of plants, and inshallah we'll cover those when we talk about each crop on date palm or lime or mango and different crops. But here in general, overall, huge wasted, huge waste in fruit crops is caused by pests and diseases. This is the main problem even in Oman. So many different problems with pests and diseases in fruit trees, and so there is the witch's broom, there's a mango decline, and you have the leaf hoppers, so many different kinds. Dubas bug, for example. So how do we control these pests and diseases? The same way like we control weeds. There is biological method or biocontrol, again using different parasites and predators like we did for weeds. But also in fruit trees, we can use rootstocks that can, and scions that can actually tolerate certain kinds of pests. For example, citrus, if you are doing citrus, you can use different rootstock. For example, if you take this citrus, so you know the rootstock, right? This is the root. This is grafting. So this is grafted. This is the scion, and here we have the rootstock. And so when you have this, You choose a rootstock that is tolerant to the common pest and disease. So that how can they become tolerant? Like for example, sour orange is tolerant to Phytophthora, while lime is not. That is because the morphology of the plant, because of the color of the plant, of the leaf, for example, or the taste and the odor of the leaf. So this makes the plant less desirable for this particular insect or disease. And so this is why this plant is resistant, because of these different things, which is basically physical and chemical, that are existing in the plant itself. Of course, other method of controlling the pest and disease are using parasites and predators. Other thing you can do to control pest and disease include cultural practices such as irrigation. For example, if you have a disease like gummosis, you want to have basins closed so there is no contact between different trees. So you have a tree here, a tree here. Everyone has its own basin. It's not like flood irrigation where water will move. Here it doesn't move. So that's why you need to separate plant basins, each one of them on its own. So this is one for this tree and there's one there, and they are not connected. If they are connected, then you are transferring the disease between these two plants. Another thing you can do is propagating the plants in a hygiene way. That means very clean way. You make sure that your all the pruning shears or everything is clean. When you do pruning, when you do propagation, you have to have a disease-free plants. Finally, you can remove the plant itself or the plant part that is infected. That's also part of the cultural practices. Finally, there is the chemical control that you can use to control pests and diseases. Of course, here the same story. If you are having insect problem, you use insecticides or pesticides. You can also use fungicides, nematicides, depending on what problem you have. Do you have an insect problem, or a pest problem, or a disease problem? Then you select the right pesticide for that problem. Issue here is the residues that are left over in the fruit, so you have to be careful not to have any residues in the fruit. So you have to have enough time before harvest. You don't spray at the time of harvesting, because when you harvest, you don't want any residues in the fruit. The other problem with chemical control is environmental impact. Many problems in the environment because you are actually spraying all these chemicals that will kill other insects and beneficial insects. So this is a problem that is environmental, because here you are not only killing harmful insects, but you also killing beneficial insects. More on this, each country has a quarantine. That means anytime you import any plant or any animal or anything, you have to go through quarantine. This is to make sure that you are not transferring diseases with the plant. So this will not allow you to transfer disease or insect with the plant when you bring the plant to the country. So you bring in a plant, you have to go through quarantine. Where do you find quarantine? You find quarantine in the airport. You can also find them in seaports like Sahar port. This will not allow exotic pests and diseases to come into the country. Very important to have quarantine. Finally, you can use all these together, not only one, the biocontrol, the chemical control, the quarantine, all these factors together, and we call it integrated pest management. That means you are talking about more than one technique, more than one strategy to control. So IPM means integrated pest management. So here we have integrated pest and disease management. That means you are using more than one technique, not just one, but you also use biological, you use chemicals, use quarantine, use cultural practices, use physical, and all of these together are called integrated pest and disease management. So that will keep the plants above the threshold level so they will not cause any economical impact on the farmer or on your fruit production. So this is very important. You have to maintain production even though you have